The brain you have today is not the brain you were born with. It is not even the brain you had 5 years ago. Here in this video, you'll be learning how to break patterns that truncate potentials, a case study, reference from the last video, the biology of a wasted ceiling. Every experience you've had, every habit you've run, every environment you've stayed in has physically changed the structure of your neural tissue, the density of your connections, the sensitivity of your receptors, the architecture of who you are. Scientists call this neuroplasticity, and it means something that most people never fully absorb. The damage is not permanent. Not the cortisol erosion, not the dopamine hijack, not the identity ceiling you built without knowing you were building it. Every single mechanism that worked against you is reversible, biologically, measurably, with evidence. This is that evidence. Let's start where the problem started, the habit loop. Recall, the basal ganglia encodes repeated behavior into automatic routines. Your brain stops thinking about familiar patterns and runs them on autopilot. For destructive habits, this means the behavior happens before your conscious mind has even registered that it started. The old model said, break the habit, replace it with willpower. The new model, built on decades of behavioral neuroscience, says something more precise. You cannot erase a habit loop, but you can reroute it. MIT researcher Anne Graybiel, who spent decades mapping the basal ganglia, found that habit circuits never fully disappear. They go dormant. The neural pathway stays encoded, waiting. This is why someone sober for 10 years can relapse under enough stress. The old road is still there. But here is what her research also showed. The brain will preferentially use whichever pathway is most recently and most frequently activated, which means the intervention is not destruction, it is displacement. The technique with the most consistent scientific backing is called habit stacking, pairing a new behavior directly onto an existing cue so the old trigger fires a new response. Not through willpower, through repetition deep enough to re-engage the basal ganglia's encoding mechanism, the same system that built the old habit, and redirect it. The key variable is not motivation, it is frequency in the early window. Neuroscientist Philippa Lally's research at University College London found that a behavior becomes automatic, meaning the basal ganglia takes it over, at an average of 66 days of consistent repetition, not 21. The 21-day myth has no scientific basis. 66 days, consistent, not perfect. Consistency over intensity is what the research supports. You are not fighting your habits, you are slowly outbuilding them. The dopamine system was hijacked by engineered unpredictability, calibrated to fire on shallow, high-frequency stimulation, notifications, scrolls, quick hits of novelty, until deep, slow reward activities stopped feeling like anything at all. Reversing this is not about eliminating dopamine. It is about resensitizing the system to the rewards that actually matter. The mechanism is called dopamine receptor upregulation. When you chronically overstimulate the dopamine system, it responds by reducing receptor density. It removes receptors from the surface of neurons to avoid overload. This is called downregulation. The result is that normal, meaningful rewards, finishing something difficult, connecting deeply with someone, creating something real, barely register. Your baseline has been artificially elevated, and real life can't compete. Upregulation, the reversal, works through deliberate dopamine fasting. Not the pop science version, the neurological one. Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has outlined the mechanism clearly. When you systematically remove artificial high-stimulation inputs and tolerate the discomfort that follows, the brain responds by increasing receptor density over roughly 2 to 4 weeks. It lowers the baseline. Real rewards start to feel real again. The discomfort in the first week is not weakness. It is the system recalibrating. The agitation, the restlessness, the flatness, these are neurological withdrawal from an artificially elevated dopamine floor. On the other side of that window, tasks you couldn't focus on for 20 minutes begin holding attention for 2 hours, not because you became disciplined, because the system was restored to a sensitivity it was always capable of. Pair this with what researchers call effort-based reward training, deliberately choosing activities where the reward arrives after sustained discomfort, and the system learns to anticipate long-form rewards again. It relearns patience at the neurological level. Chronic stress physically eroded the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, impulse regulation, and long-term thinking. It enlarged the amygdala, the threat detection system, and tilted the brain's balance toward reaction over reflection. This sounds irreversible. It is not. In 2011, a landmark study led by neuroscientist Sarah Lazar at Harvard Medical School took a group of people under chronic stress and put them through an 8-week structured mindfulness program. At the end, they scanned their brains. The prefrontal cortex had measurably thickened. Gray matter density had increased. The amygdala had shrunk. 8 weeks, no medication, no surgery. Structural brain change. But mindfulness is only one mechanism. Physical exercise has shown some of the most dramatic results. Psychiatrist John Ratey at Harvard, in his research compiled in Spark, documented what happens in the brain during and after aerobic exercise. The brain releases a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which Ratey describes as miracle grow for the brain. BDNF directly stimulates the growth of new neurons, particularly in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. It physically rebuilds what stress eroded. The protocol that shows up consistently in the research: 20 to 30 minutes of moderate aerobic activity, 3 to 5 times per week. Not a triathlon, not a transformation, just consistent elevation of heart rate, consistently applied. Within 12 weeks, measurable improvement in executive function, the cognitive umbrella term for the prefrontal cortex's work, appears in controlled studies. Planning improves, impulsivity decreases. The window between stimulus and response, where all of your best decisions live, begins to widen. You are not just getting fitter, you are growing back the part of your brain that sees the future. Your nervous system was calibrated to match your environment. The habits, pace, and expectations of the people around you were absorbed below the level of conscious choice. This works in reverse just as powerfully. The same Christakis and Fowler research that showed how underperformance spreads through social networks also showed how ambition, health, and high standards spread the same way. Same mechanisms, same 3 degrees of influence. Proximity is not metaphor. It is neuroscience. The mechanism is called neural resonance, sometimes described through mirror neurons, the cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. Your brain does not cleanly distinguish between watching excellence and experiencing it. Sustained proximity to people operating at a different level begins to recalibrate what your nervous system registers as normal. Not through inspiration, through biological mimicry. This is why environment change often produces behavioral change that willpower alone could not. Not because the person became more motivated, but because their nervous system received a new signal about where baseline is. The actionable implication is not find better friends as social advice. It is more specific than that. Deliberate, repeated exposure to environments where your target behavior is the norm, not the exception, triggers passive recalibration. Co-working spaces, online communities, mentorship, even sustained consumption of long-form content from people operating at the level you're moving toward. All of these feed the mirror neuron system with new reference points. You are not trying to be inspired. You are trying to reset what normal feels like. The deepest layer of the ceiling was identity, the self-concept that had been built around unrealized potential and that unconsciously sabotaged progress to stay consistent with itself. This is the hardest layer to work on, not because it requires the most effort, but because it is the least visible. The scientific framework that best addresses this comes from psychologist James Pennebaker's research on expressive writing and identity reconstruction, and from the clinical psychology of cognitive diffusion developed within acceptance and commitment therapy. The core mechanism of cognitive diffusion is this: you are not your thoughts about yourself, you are the one observing them. Pennebaker's research across multiple decades showed that people who spent 15 to 20 minutes a day writing about their core identity narratives, specifically writing them as external stories rather than internal truths, showed measurable changes in psychological flexibility, stress hormone levels, and long-term behavioral patterns. The act of narrating your identity rather than inhabiting it creates neurological distance from the self-concept. It moves identity from the automatic processing system to the deliberate one, where it can be examined, questioned, and rewritten. This is not journaling as therapy, it is identity editing as a cognitive practice. Pair this with what behavioral scientist BJ Fogg calls identity-based habit anchoring, building new behaviors around a slowly constructed new self-concept, and the system begins to close the loop. You are not just changing what you do, you are changing who the brain believes it is protecting, and a nervous system protecting a different identity will allow a different ceiling. Let's be honest about what this is and what it isn't. This is not a protocol that takes 2 weeks. It is not a system you hack once and maintain passively. The brain responds to consistency applied over months, not effort applied over weekends. But the science is unambiguous on this. The habit loop can be rerouted through the same basal ganglia system that encoded it in the first place. The dopamine system can be recalibrated through deliberate withdrawal and effort-based reward training. The prefrontal cortex can be rebuilt through aerobic exercise and structured mindfulness, measurably in 8 to 12 weeks. The social calibration can be reset through deliberate environmental exposure and the quiet biology of neural resonance. The identity ceiling can be rewritten, not through motivation, but through cognitive diffusion and the slow construction of a new self-concept the nervous system is willing to protect. Every one of these mechanisms was already inside you. They built the ceiling. They can raise it. Not because you decide to try harder, because you finally understand what you're actually working with. If you find this content helpful, kindly subscribe, comment, like, and share.